In 1961, 27 years after Sandino's assassination, a revolutionary movement bearing his name would go on to change the country forever. The Sandinista National Liberation Front, known simply as the FSLN or the Sandinistas, was founded on July 19, 1961. Its main founder was Carlos Fonseca, a Nicaraguan teacher, librarian, and revolutionary Marxist. Inspired by the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the Cuban Revolution of 1959, Fonseca adapted international socialism to Nicaragua's local conditions, upholding Sandino as the forefather of the Nicaraguan Revolution.
¡Viva la revolución!
Nicaragua is the largest country by geographic area in Central America, bordered to the north by Honduras and to the south by Costa Rica. It's divided into 15 departments and 2 autonomous regions on the Caribbean coast. The primary language is Spanish, but on the Caribbean coast, a wide range of languages are spoken, including Miskitu, Mayagna, Creole, and Garifuna. It's primarily an agricultural nation, producing both for export and local consumption. Some of its principal crops include coffee, bananas, sugarcane, tobacco, livestock, palm beans, and rice. After independence from Spain in 1821, Nicaragua was subject to over a century of political infighting between conservatives and liberals. Between 1823 and 1838, Nicaragua formed part of the United Provinces of Central America, which included Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. But by 1840, because of political tensions between conservatives and liberals, the United Provinces of Central America was dissolved, and each country broke off into separate republics. Because of its rich natural resources and key geopolitical position between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, Nicaragua was subject to numerous foreign invasions. U.S. forces invaded the Central American country at least 11 times between 1853 and 1927. In 1856, U.S. mercenary William Walker invaded Nicaragua and declared himself president. Walker, who was closely tied to the Southern Confederacy, proceeded to decree English as the official language and even legalized slavery. In response to Walker's invasion of Nicaragua, the armies of Central America came together and defeated him. Walker was eventually sentenced to death and executed by firing squad. To this day, Walker's invasion remains fresh in the minds of all Nicaraguenses. It's a reminder of the racism and imperial arrogance of many in the United States, who view Nicaragua as a land to be colonized and exploited. A central figure in the politics of Nicaragua for much of the 20th century is Augusto César Sandino. Sandino was a revolutionary who organized a guerrilla army in favor of workers, campesinos, and indigenous peoples who fought against the U.S. Marines, who continually invaded and occupied Nicaragua. Between 1927 and 1933, during one of the longest and bloodiest U.S. occupations, Sandino led a ragtag group of campesino guerrillas in an armed struggle against the occupiers. Despite several retreats, Sandino and his forces were able to weaken the invaders through attrition, eventually forcing them to leave. In January of 1931, U.S. Secretary of State Henry Stimson announced that all U.S. soldiers in Nicaragua would be withdrawn following the 1932 election in that country. The newly created Nicaraguan National Guard, which continued to be commanded by the U.S. officers, took power. Once the Marines left, Sandino laid down his arms for the sake of peace, despite never holding government office. However, the U.S.-trained head of the National Guard, Anastasio Somoza, assassinated Sandino, disappeared his body, and massacred his army. With the backing of the United States, the Somoza family regime would rule Nicaragua for the next 45 years. In 1961, 27 years after Sandino's assassination, a revolutionary movement bearing his name would go on to change the country forever. The Sandinista National Liberation Front, known simply as the FSLN or the Sandinistas, was founded on July 19, 1961. Its main founder was Carlos Fonseca, a Nicaraguan teacher, librarian, and revolutionary Marxist. Inspired by the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the Cuban Revolution of 1959, Fonseca adapted international socialism to Nicaragua's local conditions, upholding Sandino as the forefather of the Nicaraguan Revolution. After decades of struggle, discussion, debate, and deadly repression by the National Guard, the Sandinistas led a successful insurrection that resulted in the triumph of the Sandinista Popular Revolution on July 19, 1979. Sadly, Fonseca was murdered 3 years before the Sandinistas came to power. Ortega, the current president of Nicaragua, was a leading figure in the Sandinista guerrilla movement. Despite being tortured and jailed numerous times, Ortega continued to fight the Somoza regime. Murillo, his wife and current vice president, was also a central Sandinista leader, playing a key role in organizing women for the revolution. The Sandinista Popular Revolution accomplished many great things for the people of Nicaragua. Its literacy campaign reduced illiteracy rates from about 50% to 12.7% in a matter of months. Its land reform programs redistributed 5 million acres of arable land to 120,000 previously landless peasant families. The Sandinista Popular Revolution also cultivated a powerful cultural movement of music and art that remains celebrated to this day. By 1981, following the election of U.S. President Ronald Reagan, the imperialist war against Nicaragua took a darker turn. Reagan's administration was committed to overthrowing the revolution and developed a war using counter-revolutionaries known as the Contras, who were armed and trained in neighboring Honduras. The Contra War involved more than 1,300 acts of terrorism, mostly against civilian targets such as health clinics, schools, and volunteer centers. 27-year-old artist and engineer Ben Linder from Portland, Oregon, was among those killed by the Contras in 1987. Over 10 years, some 50,000 Nicaraguenses were killed as workers, students, and peasants participated in the defense of the revolution. From bombing public plazas to beheading Sandinista supporters, the Contras were known for their brutal and barbaric tactics. The Contras also served as runners for Colombian drug cartels, flooding the streets of the United States with cocaine. Two former Nicaraguan Contras revealed in an interview with the Washington Post that the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency gave them clearance in 1984 to accept airplanes and cash from a man under federal indictment on drug trafficking charges. The cocaine that was trafficked into the hoods of the United States by the Contras played a role in dividing and destroying revolutionary Black and Latino movements like the Black Panther Party, the Puerto Rican Young Lords Party, and the Chicano Brown Berets. In 1985, Reagan referred to the Contras as, quote, the moral equal of our founding fathers. Reagan, a staunch anti-communist, had developed a new and more sinister strategy for the imperial conquest of Nicaragua. The strategy involved arming, training, and funding extremist right-wing groups like the Contras and portraying them as pro-democracy freedom fighters. In 1990, after over a decade of U.S. destabilization efforts in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas lost state power. Under pressure, they agreed to hold elections with a conservative opposition coalition backed by the United States, the National Opposition Union, known as UNO, which won the presidency. The election was mired in accusations of being rigged in favor of the conservative opposition camp. Ortega, a veteran guerrillero and socialist organizer who led the country from 1979 to 1990, was removed, and Violeta Chamorro became president. Neoliberalism was ushered in, rolling back almost all of the progressive gains made during the first stage of the Sandinista Popular Revolution. In 2006, Ortega was re-elected president of Nicaragua with 38% of the popular vote, bringing a 21st century face to Nicaraguan socialism. This occurred within the context of the Pink Tide, a term used to describe the ascendancy of democratic socialist leaders across Latin America from 2006 to 2012. The Sandinista government of unity and reconciliation has promoted the peaceful construction of socialism in Nicaragua. Thousands of low-cost public housing units have been constructed. Thousands of miles of roads have been paved, connecting distant and once inaccessible lands. Over 98% of the country has access to electricity. Everyone has access to clean drinking water. Free and low-cost education is provided to all. Micro-entrepreneurship and cooperative economies are supported by the national government. And over 90% of the food consumed in Nicaragua is produced within its national borders. Nicaragua was one of the first countries to meet the UN Millennial Development Goals, ranks as one of the top countries in the world for gender parity, and has very low levels of violence and migration compared to other Central American countries.